Okay. So what we'll talk about is the physical Megillah. I think before Purim, a lot of people hear about Inyonei Megillah and Divrei Torah about the Megillah, Hashkafa about the Megillah, but there's very little spoken about the actual physical Megillah, what's involved, what the Halachos are, what the Inyanim are, relative to the actual writing of the Megillah and how it's meant to be written, how it's meant to look. So we'll start with I think the easiest topic, although easiest is relative, is how many lines the Megillah should be. I think most of us are familiar that there are 11-line Megillas, there are 21-line Megillas, 28-line Megillas, 42-line Megillas. What's with the lines? In other words, when it comes to a Sefer Torah, I think nobody really has heard too much about how many lines are meant to be in a Sefer Torah. Yet when it comes to Megillah, unlike the rest of Nach, in other words, if somebody has a Sefer Yeshua or Sefer Shoftim, whatever it may be, we don't hear about any tumult about how many lines it's supposed to be. How come all of a sudden by Megilas Esther, there are all these different numbers of lines? What do these numbers mean, and where do they come from? So it starts with, first let's deal with Sifrei Torah. When it comes to Sifrei Torah, so we're familiar with the standard Sifrei Torah nowadays, which are 42 lines. If you walk into a regular shul, you look at a regular Sefer Torah, you open up a regular Tikkun Kairim, you'll find a 42-line template. That comes from the Masechtas Sefer. Masechtas Sefer actually gives different numbers. 42, some have a gersa of 48, 60, 72, 90. And if you look at the old European Sifrei Torah, you actually find different numbers of lines in the Sifrei Torah. But as the years have gone by, it's become more or less standardized nowadays that we have a 42-line Sefer Torah, which again is based on the Masechtas Sefer, or at least one gersa in the Masechtas Sefer.
True for Ashkenazim, Sfardim.
Across the board, everyone, except for Teimanim. Teimanim have 51 lines because they follow the Rambam, and the Rambam Sefer Torah was 51 lines. But yes, Ashkenazim and Sfardim all today use a standard, what's called a 42-line tikkun. Now, when it comes to Megilas Esther, so there's a Maram Mirottenberg, which is brought in the Haggais Maimoni, and he quotes Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam says that a Megilas Esther has all the same dinim as a Sefer Torah, and he goes and delineates all the halachas that he's talking about when he says that it has the same dinim as a Sefer Torah. And one of the things he mentions over there is that it should have the same number of lines as a Sefer Torah. Again, I'm going to use the number 42. There's a shaila in the girsa whether it's 42 or 48, but for the purposes of just making things simpler, we'll go with the number 42. So he says it should have the same number of lines as a Sefer Torah, and based on that, so it should the Megillah should be 42 lines, which is interesting because I think if we look around shul, if there are 20, 30, 40 people in shul that have Megillas, I don't think we're going to see too many that have 42-line Megillas, and the question becomes, why? We also, I think many of us are familiar with the idea that it's very common to hear people talking about the fact that 11-line Megillah is something special about an 11-line Megillah. It's called the Gra. Some people call it the Gra Megillah. So what's the deal with 11-line Megillas? Where does 11-line Megillas, where do they come from, and why do they exist? So the answer is that the roots of the 11-line Megillah are in the Yerushalmi, in Maseches Megillah, obviously, in Paragimel Halacha Zayin. And the Yerushalmi over there says the following. Rav Zeira, Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rav, Shiras hayam v'shiras dvarim nechtavim ariach al gabe leveinu, leveinu al gabe ariach. Aseres b'nei Haman u'malchei Knan nechtavim ariach al gabe ariach, u'leveinu al gabe leveinu. Why? The kol b'noyin dechein loy kohen. So what does that mean? That means as follows. If we look in the Sefer Torah, when we get up to Shiras Oz Yashir, if you look in the Art Scroll Siddur, they have it set up like it is in the Sefer Torah. It's in an interlocking pattern. It's a shira, right? And if you look at the page, you'll see. You mind if I could have that Art Scroll Siddur there? Thank you. Thank you. And this they don't have it. Okay. I thought they had it. In the Chumash they have it. Oh, there you go. Let's see if they have it here. They don't have it in here either. Okay. Anyway, it's an interlocking pattern. That's how they have it set up. The lines are such that there are it's like bricks that are set up. Here, there's actually a picture here in the Yerushalmi over here. If you could see, it's there. That's good. Thank you. Shkayach. Okay, so you can see over here in the Chumash that it's set up in a pattern where everything is interlocking. Okay, you don't have. In other words, there's no place where you can drop through over here. The lines are all set up that there's always ksav somewhere. So that's Shiras Hayam. Masha'enkein, the Gemara says that our shira, the shira of Oz Yashir, of Aseres B'nai Haman, is set up like two columns. Okay, you have one on top of the other, like in Shiras Hazinu. Okay, I brought some show and tell over here. I actually didn't have too many Megillas. I only had one by me in the house. They're all gone. But I do have the tikkun, so at least I was able to bring the tikkun. Here, if you look at the Aseres B'nai Haman over here, you can see it's two columns. It's not interlocking at all. There's actually a large amount of empty space between the shemus, as it's called, and the esin on the other side. Okay, so that's what the Yerushalmi is saying, that the shira of Aseres B'nai Haman is meant to be set up like that. Ariach al gabe ariach, u'leveina al gabe leveina. Now, ariach is one type of brick, and leveina is another type of brick. Ariach is a smaller brick. Leveina is a longer type of brick. Okay, so then the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Bun, Tzarech sheyehei ish b'rosh dapa ve'es b'seifa. The word ish should be b'rosh dapa. Okay, you see the first word in the Aseres B'nai Haman is ish. Ve'es b'seifa. And es is at the end of the daf. That's the lashon of the Yerushalmi. The Masechah Sefer brings the same thing, and the Masechah Sefer adds a couple of words, and it says ve'aseres b'seif dapa. Now, there's a big machlokes. What does this mean? When it says ish b'reish dapa, ve'es b'seif dapa, what does that mean? And when it says aseres b'seif dapa, what does that mean? So some learn, as you see on this page, that ish is the first word on the page, ish b'reish dapa, okay? And es is b'seif dapa. Now that can't mean at the end of the page because we have aseres at the end of the page. So it means ish b'reish dapa, ish is at the beginning of the page. Es b'seif dapa, es at the end of the line. And then aseres b'seif dapa, aseres is at the end of the page. By definition, if one understands the Yerushalmi that way, then the Aseres B'nai Haman has to be on its own page. Okay? The Vilna Gaon said that that's a mistake. Shibushu. He says that's not the pshat in the Yerushalmi. It's not what it means at all. He says, ish b'reish dapa, and es b'seif dapa means that ish is at the beginning of the line, and es is at the end of the line. And according to the Vilna Gaon, there's no reason for ish to be at the beginning of the page. Okay? Because when it says ish b'reish dapa, it just means that ish is at the beginning of the line. So according to the Vilna Gaon, you have the Aseres B'nai Haman looking like this. Okay? Because you have ish b'reish dapa, you have ish at the beginning of the line. Es b'seif dapa, es at the end of the line. Now, aseres b'seif dapa, what does that mean? So the Nishmas Adam says, the Chai Adam says that the Vilna Gaon when he saw, he apparently didn't have this girsa, this Messiah of Aseres B'Seif Dapa, but later in his life when he saw it, so while formerly he had the Aseres B'nei Haman either in the middle of the page or at the top of the page, but when he saw this idea of Aseres B'Seif Dapa, so he moved it to the bottom of the page. He made a Megillah with Ish at the beginning of the line, S at the end of the line, Aseres B'Seif Dapa, Aseres at the end of the page.
Based on how many lines per page, 42?
Yes. I mean, it doesn't have to be 42. It could be 28. It could be 36. It could be anything. But the idea would be that according to the Vilna Gaon, the idea is that there's no inyan whatsoever to have the Aseres B'nei Haman on its own page. Okay?
Which means he doesn't hold by this 11 line.
Oh, so 1 second. So, now, if according to the Vilna Gaon, there's no inyan of having the Aseres B'nei Haman on its own page, according to those who do have the Aseres B'nei Haman on its own page, you have a technical problem because there's something called a shir parsha. Shir parsha means between the paragraphs in a Sefer Torah there's a certain amount of space. So let's say you have a blank line between two paragraphs, right? In other words, in the Chumash, we'll always see that you have a samach and a pei. Here and there, there's a samach and a pei. That stands for stuma and psucha. Sometimes you have a parsha psucha, sometimes you have a parsha stuma. There are different ways to set up parshas, psuchas, and stumas. But be that as it may, everybody agrees that if you have a blank line in the middle of a Sefer Torah, so that would be a new parsha, right? I don't mean a parsha like Bereshis Nayach Lech Lecha. I mean a parsha as in a paragraph. Now, if you have a paragraph space in a Sefer Torah where there's not meant to be one, so the Sefer Torah is puzzle. In other words, the parshas have to be exactly the way they're meant to be. You have to have a psucha where there's supposed to be a psucha, a stuma where there's supposed to be a stuma. Here, in other words, if you look over here, this space in the middle over here, that's a parsha stuma. Okay? Now that happens to be in the Megillah. There are no psuchas, but a stuma is in the middle of the line. So again, if you have a blank line in the middle of somewhere, so that would be a parsha, and that would be a problem. So now, if you hold that the Aseres B'nei Haman has to be on its own page, and you have, let's say, a 21, 28, 42 line Megillah, so by definition, if the Aseres B'nei Haman only takes up 11 lines, you're going to have a lot of blank space on that page. So what to do? If you have a lot of blank space on that page, so then you have a shaila of a shir parsha. So you have a lot of problem. You have a big problem. So what's the solution? The solution is that you have to blow up the Aseres B'nei Haman and make them very, very large. If you make them very, very large, so then you don't have any spaces between the lines, and you don't have any shir parsha. And then you don't have any problem. So that is what the Vilna Gaon said is a shibush. The Vilna Gaon said that if you have an Aseres B'nei Haman that looks like this, that's a shibush. Why is it a shibush? Because this is what we call Oisius Rabasi. Oisius Rabasi you have in a Sefer Torah, this week's parasha, Vayikra, right? Everybody knows the aleph of Vayikra is Ois Ze'ira. It's a small letter. So too you have in the Torah in various places Oisius Rabasi. So the Vilna Gaon says where you're supposed to have a Rabasi and where you're supposed to have a Ze'ira is something that's given to us as a Messiah. We know we have a Messiah of where the Oisius Rabasi are and where the Oisius Ze'iris are. So if you put an Ois Rabasi where there's not supposed to be one, that's a mistake. And so there would be anywhere in Tanakh. Anywhere in Tanakh. So if you're going to make Oisius Rabasi here, says the Vilna Gaon, 1 second, we don't have any Messiah that says that the Aseres B'nei Haman are meant to be written in Oisius Rabasi. So obviously it's a mistake to say that the Aseres B'nei Haman has to be on its own page, because the only way to make it on its own page is if you have Oisius Rabasi, because otherwise you're going to have a problem of a shir parsha. We don't have any Messiah that says it's supposed to be Oisius Rabasi. So obviously the pshat in the Yerushalmi is that the letters are regular size, and like this Megillah, that the Aseres B'nei Haman is just in the middle of a regular column. Yeah.
What's the shear for Rabasi? Is it its own audience?
Oh, very good. So your taina is, you were mechaven to Rabbi Yokubka Landau. Rabbi Yokubka Landau was the mechutin of the Beis Ephraim and the son of the Noda Yehuda. And he said, your taina, he said that Oisius Rabasi means that relative to the other letters, which are regular, this ice is Rabasi. But if the entire column is the same, then that's not an ice Rabasi, because the entire column is the same. So maybe it's a column that's different than the rest of the columns, but that wouldn't have a din of an ice Rabasi. And the Beis Ephraim agreed with Rabbi Yaakov Kalandau. He agreed with your taina. Now,
there's also smaller osios within the Seres B'nai Haman, so that would imply that the other ones are regular. No? Because there's smaller
well,
ones
it just implies that the other ones are larger. That's all. But what size?
The osios Rabasi because they're so big compared to everything, but then there's osios.
No, but see here, this is the ice katana that you're talking about. So it's relative to the Isius that surround it, it's Zeira. So that's okay. So now, let's say we want to be Yaitza all the Shitas, right? That's what life is all about. We always want to be Yaitza all the Shitas. So along came a number of very chashuv people who lived in the Vilna vicinity, and they wanted to be Yaitza the Shita of the Vilna Gaon. But on the other hand, as very religious people, they also wanted to be Yaitza the other Shita, that the Aseres B'nai Haman should be on its own page, right? Again, the other Shita holds that the Aseres B'nai Haman should be on its own page, which means that you're going to have to swell the letters. The Vilna Gaon says there's no Indian for it to be on its own page because you're going to have to swell the letters. So what's the best Eitzah? So they came up with an idea. If we make the Megillah 11 lines, if every page is 11 lines, so then you solve your problem. Because then you can have the page of the Aseres B'nai Haman on its own column, its own page, and you don't have to swell the size of the letters. You don't need any Isius Rabasi. So you could have letters which are exactly the same size as the rest of the Megillah. So you Yaitza the Shita of the Vilna Gaon. You have the Aseres B'nai Haman on its own column. So you Yaitza those other Shitas. And in this manner, a person could be Yaitza Kol Hadeis. So this is where, when you hear about 11-line Megillas and you hear about Gra Megillas, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the idea that in this way you could be Yaitza all the Shitas, including the Shita of the Vilna Gaon. Now it's ironic because the Vilna Gaon did not have an 11-line Megillah, and Pashtus would not have had any interest in owning an 11-line Megillah, because the Vilna Gaon had a Megillah like this, right? He held that this is the best way to have a Megillah, and this Megillah has a Maila that it's written according to those Rishonim that say that it should be the same amount of lines as a Sefer Torah. By having 11 lines, so you're losing out on that Maila of having it as the same number of lines as a Sefer Torah. Now, there are a number of Rishonim that say that you don't need the same number of lines as a Sefer Torah. But again, to mamish be Yaitza all the Shitas, you can't be Yaitza all the Shitas. But that's the idea behind the 11-line Megillah. And
It's 4 times thicker than a normal.
the 11-line Megillah. Correct. So the Beis Ephraim actually says that let's just get our chronology straight. The Vilna Gaon was nifter in the year 1797. The Beis Ephraim was nifter in the year, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 1827. So the Beis Ephraim writes in his Tshuva, he says that we want to be Yaitz of the Vilna Gaon Shita, and that's great. He says, but if you're going to do like the Vilna Gaon, you're going to have to make a Megillah 11 lines. Right? If you want to be Yaitza both Shitas, you have to make a Megillah that's going to be 11 lines. He says, and that's crazy because it's going to be a very fat Megillah. So exactly what you said, the Beis Ephraim says. He says that would be like a weird-looking Megillah, and you're supposed to have blank space at the beginning of the Megillah to wrap around the whole Megillah. He says you're going to need a big space. He just thinks it's like a weird idea. But about 20 years after that, you do see that they actually started making 11-line Megillah. Just an ironic side point that has nothing to do with anything. The first person that I'm personally aware of that's on record as having written an 11-line Megillah is actually the Bnei Yissaschar. So a Chassidish Rebbe, ironically, is the first one that I'm aware of, at least, who wrote an 11-line Megillah. So that's the question of the number of lines. By the way, just important to mention, this Megillah is a very unusual Megillah, and the Mishnah Berurah actually is mesupik if a person is even allowed to lane from such a Megillah. He says at the end that one is, but he's not happy about it because the minig is to make the Aseres B'nai Haman large. I think we're all aware of that. The minig is to make the Aseres B'nai Haman large. So even though the Beis Ephraim himself says in that tshuva that even though l'chayr it's a very shvera minig, because all the Rishonim hold like this, that this is what the Megillah should look like, and the Vilna Gaon holds that this is what the Megillah should look like. But l'maisa, since the minig ha'olam is to make a large Aseres B'nai Haman on its own page, so one should not be meshana from the minig. Ad kedei kach, like I said, the Mishnah Berurah is not happy with Megillas like this, even though Pashtus, this is the Megillah that most of the Rishonim used. Correct. But they tie it tough luck. That's what it comes from the fact, no, it comes from the fact that there's a Ashkafa and the Piskei Tosfos that say that the Aseres B'nai Haman should be on its own page, which by definition is going to mean that you're going to have to make Oisius Rabasi, and that became the Minig Ha'olam. So the Achreinim say that once it's the Minig Ha'olam, even though all the Rishonim say like the Vilna Gaon, and l'chayr it's a davar pashut that the Vilna Gaon Shita is the correct Shita, but tough luck. The Minig Ha'olam is the Minig Ha'olam, and one should not change from the Minig Ha'olam.
Do they say what the chashivus is of the Aseres B'nai Haman, that it should be separated like that, or they just say it should be?
The amount of, what, on its own page?
You say like, what's the chashivus of that as opposed to something else? Like why?
Well, I think that's like one of the highlights of the Megillah. That is where the expression of the fact that Klal Yisrael, was saved, was expressed by the death of the Aseres B'nai Haman, and indeed, we're gonna get to it why it's set up like this. Hang tight.
The sheet of the Mishnah Berurah is to just make the otiyot larger at the bottom of the 42 line?
No, like this. You have a Megillah that's either 20, 21, 28, or 42 lines, and you have a big Aseres B'nai Haman like this. That's the Shita of the Mishnah Berurah. And it's not just the Mishnah Berurah, it's the Chai Adam says that, and Kesa Sefer, and all the Achreinim say that this is the way it should be. This just happens to look very funny, because usually we don't see 42-line Megillas. It's much larger than a regular one, and also the space in between, which we'll get to, also makes it look interesting. Now, just as another side issue, many people know that when they're getting a Megillah, they want a Hamelech Megillah. What's a Hamelech Megillah? So the answer is that Hamelech Megillah really is nothing. It just means that Hamelech is the first word on every column, and there's no marker for such a thing at all, and how that became, just became like a cool thing, and they make pictures on top of they make a crown on top of it, whatever, but it has zero halachic significance. It's not a hiddur, it's not a maila, there's nothing to it. 28 is the standard hamelech, and as we saw now, there's an inyan to make an 11-line Megillah, there's an inyan to make a 42-line Megillah, there's no inyan in a 28-line Megillah. Another standard size is 21 lines, which also has zero halachic significance, and there are hamelech tikkun for 21 lines also, but usually a standard hamelech Megillah is 28 lines. Once we mentioned it, so I'll also take the opportunity to mention that in terms of making pictures on the Megillah, very often we see crowns on top of the hamelech and things of that nature. The Paiskim are very displeased with pictures in a Megillah. They view it as a bizayin to kisvei hakodesh.
Actual crowns, or not just on the left? You're not talking about the crowns on the tagim.
Not the tagim, no. Actual pictures of crowns. Nekudas is a shaila. Lamaisa we're makel about Nekudas, but Nekudas is there to assist the kriya. So there would be room for that if it's necessary. Nekudas, yeah.
With Dio? It's written with Dio or pencil?
Pencil usually.
So it's frowned upon, or it's not?
Nekudas?
No, the Tektumanos and stuff.
It's frowned upon, very much frowned
It's not-
upon.
Is it
No, it's not asa to learn from, but the lashon of Rabbi Elyashiv was ein ruach chachamim noicha heimenu. So they're very displeased with somebody who does such a thing. And like I said, the reason is because the bizayin for kisvei hakodesh. It's not artwork. It's not Judaica. If you want to hang Judaica on your wall, so that's a wonderful thing to do, and that's great. But when you're dealing with kisvei hakodesh, the best way to deal with kisvei hakodesh is the way that Chazal told us to, and to start adding in pictures and stuff like that is not really beseder. Now,
You don't see it by any other Megillas. It's only by Esther, and people do.
you don't see people using other Megillas so much. Like, most people don't own an Eicha or even a Rus. Shir Shirim people have, but yeah, you don't see pictures in Shir Shirim, at least I haven't seen. Now, another interesting feature regarding the Aseres B'nai Haman, there are a lot of halachos regarding Megilas Esther, as you're starting to see. So another one of those very interesting halachos is the following. How much space is meant to be, right? You have here ish ve'es, parashandasa ve'es, dalfain ve'es. So there's space between the right side of the column and the left side of the column. How much space is meant to be between the right side of the column and the left side of the column? Is there any halacha regarding that? So the answer is there certainly is. And not only is it a halacha, it's actually a very, very big machlokes. There are three shittas when it comes to this machlokes, how much space is meant to be between the right side of the column and the left side of the column. The first shitta is, let's back up one step. The Gemara says, the Gemara in Megillah, Tezayin Amud Beis, says as follows. Amar Reb Chanina bar Papa, Darash Reb Shirla, Ish Kfar Tamrasa. Kol hashiras kula nechtavis ariach al gabe leveino, leveino al gabe ariach, chutz mishirazu malchei knan, like we saw in the Yerushalmi, right? That they're stacked one on top of the other, unlike Oz Yashir, right? Because over here we have sha'ariach al gabe ariach, leveino al gabe leveina. It's stacked. My taima shaloi tehitakuma lemapalasan. Right? So we mentioned here ariach and leveina. So now let's get a little bit more into what's an ariach and what's a leveina. So the Gemara in Bava Basra says that these are two types of bricks. If somebody's building a house, so you can use different types of bricks. One type of brick is called an ariach. Another type of brick is called a leveina. How big is an ariach and how big is a leveina? So Rashi says, leveina hu chalak shehu kiflayim min haksav. Okay, a leveina, and this is the Gemara in Bava Basra says, a leveina is double the length of an ariach. Okay, so if an ariach is this wide, a leveina would be double. Okay, if I remember correctly, I could be mistaken. I think the Gemara says that an ariach is either a tefach or a tefach and a half, and a leveina is either 2 tefachim or 3 tefachim. It's double an ariach. Okay. Bava Basra.
So it's only much over here.
So very good. So that's the question. So over here, when we talk about an ariach and a leveina, Rashi says that if the ariach, first of all, there's a machlokes, what's the ariach and what's the leveina? Okay, so there's two shittas. One shitta is that the ariach, and this is the shitta of Rashi, ariach hu haksav. Okay, leveina hu chalak. So you have here ksav, and you have chalak, blank space, right? So Rashi says the ksav is the ariach, and the chalak is the leveina. That's Rashi shita. Rabbeinu Tam holds, Rabbeinu Tam is brought by the Ran. If you look in the Ran, he brings Rabbeinu Tam. He has a different shita. He says that the ve'esen, that side, that column is the ariach, and the shemais, that's the leveina. Okay? So now, let's come back to Rashi. Rashi says that ariach is the ksav and leveina is the chalak. Now, if the leveina is double the ariach, so how big is the blank space meant to be?
Not double?
Double what? Oh, very good. So you hold like Rabbi Elyashiv. Right? Obviously. Right? Rabbi Elyashiv holds that since the right side, the right column and the left column are both ksav, and we just said that ksav is ariach, so the blank space in the middle would have to be double both columns, right? If you look at the blank space, you see towards the top, right? He wrote parshandasa, ve'es, because the blank space on this column is like Rabbi Elyashiv. It's double both sides. That's Rabbi Elyashiv Shita. There are those that argue, there's a Pri Megadim that says differently. The Pri Megadim says that no, since each side is an ariach, so if the levena is double in ariach, so the levena only has to be double one side. It doesn't say that the levena is double two arichim, the levena is double one ariach. So the blank space doesn't have to be double the two sides together. It only has to be double one side. That's the Shita of the Pri Megadim. The third Shita, which is brought by the Minchas Yitzchak, he says that, like what you said before, it's just a mashal. Ariach means small, levena means big, so levena just means that you need more space, more blank space than writing space. So there's no number, it could be anything. Now there happens to be a different din that whenever you have a shira and you have space in the shira, you need at least what we were talking about before, a shir parsha, right? A shir parsha, over here you don't have any shir parsha, but here, you see over here there are shir parshas, right? The blank space between the paragraphs. The blank space between the paragraph has to be at least 9 letters worth of space. That's the shir, okay? So you would need between the two sides of the Aseres B'nai Haman at least 9 letters worth of space. That's the third shita. Okay, so it's actually, I'm sorry? The Minchas Yitzchak brings this shita that he says it's also a shach that's mashma this way, that it's lav dafka, right? And memela. So again, when it comes to like medaktikim who are purchasing Megilas Esther's, this is like a whole thing. People call up, I want to order a Megillah. I want it to be 42 lines. I want it to be 11 lines. I want the Aseres B'nai Haman like Rabbi Elyashiv. I want the Aseres B'nai Haman like the Minchas Yitzchak. It's a big deal. There are people, when they order a Megilas Esther, it's like a whole shir. Yeah, it's like a menu. Yeah. So that's another issue regarding the Aseres B'nai Haman. That is something that's a halachic issue, which again, I think a lot of people don't realize, but it's a very big halachic issue. There's another halachic issue related to the writing of the Aseres B'nai Haman. If you'll notice, just by the way, I'll just mention parenthetically that there's a very, very stark raya to Rabbi Elyashiv Shita, right? We said that Rabbi Elyashiv holds that the Aseres B'nai Haman, that the space in the middle has to be double both sides. Okay, so there's a netziv. There's a netziv in a tshuva, and the netziv in a tshuva says a fantastic thing. And Rabbi Elyashiv was not aware of this netziv. His talmidim found it afterwards, and they showed it to him, and he was very excited. It's a raya to his shita. And what's that? There's another halacha, which is brought by Sefer Torah, and that is that what's the width of a line? When you have a standard column with a width. Is there a standard width to what a column is meant to be? So it's actually a Gemara in Menachos. The Gemara in Menachos says that it should be 30 letters. Okay, the width of a line is approximately, it's not a halacha l'moshe misinai, it doesn't have to be exact, but approximately 30 letters wide. That's what the Gemara in Menachos says. Now we mentioned a few minutes ago that the Marami Rottenberg and Rabbeinu Tam say that a Megillah has all the same dinim as a Sefer Torah. Should be 42 lines, and another one of the things that they speak out over there is that each column should be 30 letters wide. Well, says the Netziv, if each column is 30 letters wide, Parshandasa is how many letters? 7. Ve'es is how many letters? 3. That's 10. Well, if the column is 30 letters wide, and you have the Aseres B'nai Haman, like the sheet of all the Rishonim and the Vilna Gaon, that it's in the middle of a regular column. Well, then by definition, how much blank space do you have in the middle? 20. So that's double both sides. And I want a taina, it's my own personal diuk. I wouldn't say it's mukhrach, but I think it's nice that it's kemat mefurish in Rashi like that. Because Rashi says, Levena hu chalak, shehu kiflayim min aksav. Rashi's just telling you a fact, right? That the levena is the blank space, hu chalak, that's the blank space between the two columns, shehu kiflayim min aksav, which is doubled aksav, because you have 7 letters on the right and 3 letters on the left, so that's doubled aksav. Rashi's just telling you a fact. It's not a shita. It's not like Rashi's telling you, I'm having a machlekes with somebody else, and it should be like Rabbi Elyashiv shita. Rashi's just telling you a fact, and that's what the Nitziv says. So l'chayra, it's a fantastic raya to Rabbi Elyashiv shita that you need double all the ksav together in the chalak between.
So then they what? So they widen out the other letters in order to make them.
So that's what I was about to get to. Yeah, what did you want?
I was going to say, because I've noticed in some Megillas, I think the one that I have, I think it's Hamelech for the most part until the end.
Yeah.
The columns get thinner.
At the end. Yeah, that's only over here also, even in the 42. That's why I rolled it subtly without anybody noticing maybe. Because the columns over here are wider, but after the Aseres B'nai Haman they get narrower. Because you don't have that many words left in the Megillah. So in the 28-line Megillas and in the 42-line Megillas, the lines get progressively narrower after. It's a practical thing. And the 11-line Megillas, actually, they're uniform length from beginning to end.
Before Rabbi Yashiv, right? Very recent. What were they doing?
So before Rabbi Elyashiv, what were they doing? That's a terrific question. So in Europe, they were pretty much doing, I wasn't there, but from what it seems, based on looking at the Achreinim and just old Megillas, it seems like 42 lines was more or less standard, and a large Aseres B'nai Haman was standard. So now we'll just come to the final point, which is what you mentioned a moment ago, and that is that if any of you noticed, in all of these samples, and in most people's Megillas, you'll find that the shemus on the right side end uniform. They're justified. And they stretch, Parshandasa is the longest one, and they stretch all the others to match Parshandasa. So they all end evenly, right? You have that in all 3 samples, right? You see they all end evenly. And even over here in this Megillah, you'll see that they all end evenly. So what's the pshat in that? Where does that come from? So the answer is that this is something that a number of Achronim are medayik from the Ran and from the Beis Yosef, where they say that we read out the Yerushalmi before, and the Gemara over here says it as well. We'll just read the Gemara again. My taima, what's the reason that the Aseres B'nai Haman are written in 2 columns, stacked? Shaloi tehei tekuma lemapalasan. So there are different pshatim in the Rishonim what this means. Shaloi tehei tekuma lemapalasan. So one pshat is that they won't be able to get out of their downfall. In other words, if somebody falls into a pit, right? Let's say you have this cavity between the 2 columns is a pit that the Aseres B'nai Haman fell into. So let's say they want to claw their way back up. So how does one claw their way out of a pit? They have to have something, right? And if you go on those rock climbing things, right? There's always something sticking out of the wall to be able to give you something to grab onto to be able to pull yourself up. But if the sides of the walls are smooth, so shaloi tehei tekuma lemapalasan, they'll never be able to pull themselves up out of their downfall, the Aseres B'nai Haman. In other words, they're going to fall into this abyss, and they're not going to be able to climb back up. So you need to have smooth sides in order to prevent them from climbing back up. It's in Yanim. Yeah, it's obviously in Yanim.
Not the word ish, so there you go.
So about the word ish and the word aseres, there's a discussion about that. We won't get into that, but the Bach talks about that. Others talk about ish and aseres.
So this is a contrast to Az Yashir, which you could very easily.
Correct, yeah, because Az Yashir is a shira for Klal Yisrael, so we want it to be firm, we want it to be, exactly, right? So that's what the Ran says. The Ran says that when you have it like this, then there's no shinayim, right? There's nothing protruding, and he says you can't extend the building, right? Now, if someone wants to make an extension and to be mechazik a building, let's say you have a building that is not so strong, you want to be mechazik it, so if you have shinayim, if you have bricks that are jutting out, you can insert other bricks and strengthen it and be mechazik the building. So the Ran says, if the Aseres B'nai Haman would be sticking out and jutting out, you'd be able to do like by Shiras Hayam, and you'd be able to be mechazik it so that it would be firm and secure. So we dafka make it like this, right? In other words, and that way, there's no way to be mechazik it, and the Aseres B'nai Haman will have their downfall. So obviously, these are clearly in Yanim or whatever, but there are Achrayim that hold that it's actually ma'akiv. And if you have Aseres B'nai Haman that are jutting out and they don't end justified, there are Achrayim, I'm not saying we would pass in this way Lamaisa, but there are Achrayim that hold that would actually passel the Megillah. If you look in that tshuva from the Netziv that I was talking about before, his lashon is fascinating thing. He says, "May olam le'ra'inu Megillah she'ekpidu b'zeh." So Netziv says he never in his life saw a Megillah that like ours. In other words, all of our Megillas end uniform because we're machmir like these Achrayim that they have to end evenly, and that's the standard nowadays. But the Netziv says in his time, nobody was machmir about it, and I'm sorry?
You could have a mistake in the osios, and it's still kosher reading.
So this is a very common thing that people misquote. It's not mamish a misquote, but it's somewhat misunderstood. What you're saying is 100% true, and that is that someone's yaitza kriyas ha-megillah if there's a spelling mistake. Okay, and even up to 49% of the Megillah, provided that you don't have an Inyan Shalim that's messed up, one would be Yaitza Kriyas HaMegillah, and you're allowed to lane from a Megillah with that has spelling mistakes. However, it's mefurish in halacha that's b'di'evid. In other words, if someone has two Megillas, and one Megillah is a beautiful Megillah, but it's missing a word, and the other Megillah, it's not so beautiful, but everything is exactly the way it's meant to be. So you're not allowed to lane for the tzibur or even for yourself from the Megillah that's missing a word. That's something that it's kosher and it's mutter, but not lechatchila. It's only Mishmeru says mefurish. It's only b'di'evid. But if somebody has a Megillah that's available, he should even try and get a Megillah. I know by my bar mitzvah, I got somebody gave me a Megillah. And I discovered years later that it had spelling mistakes, and I made that discovery on Erev Purim. So lechatchila says the Mishnah Berurah, you shouldn't use such a Megillah. You should borrow someone else's Megillah. But enechanami, if you're in the hospital, whatever it is, it's the only Megillah you have. You could lane from it. The yaitza 100%, everything is fine. Yeah, you could fix it, and you're mechuyev to fix it. Yeah, you have to fix it. How's that? Oh, yeah, that's a special kula by Megillah. Enechanami. That's exactly what Rabbeinu Tam says. He says that it has all the same dinim as a Sefer Torah, except the dinim that Chazal said are different. What are those dinim? Two things. Number one is that you can have a spelling mistake, and number two is the way the Megillah is sewn together. There's a special kula, which we don't have to get into now. It's in the Gemara, I think, on Daf Yud Ches. A special kula, if you run out of gidim, to sew up the Megillah, so you have a special kula on how you can sew it together. But says Rabbeinu Tam, other than those two things that the Gemara says mefurish, nothing, you wouldn't have any other kulas. Everything else would be exactly like a Sefer Torah. Okay.